Few names in the Sims franchise carry as much intrigue and suspicion as the Caliente sisters. From scandalous affairs to their rumored role in Bella Goth's disappearance, Nina and Dina have cemented themselves as two of the most iconic and controversial figures in Sims history. Today, we're deep diving into the dangerous history of the Caliente family to finally answer the question, are the Caliente sisters murderers or just calculating gold diggers? Did the Sims 4 retcon their past, or have we just not been looking closely enough? At the end of this video, I'm gonna present a theory about the Caliente family that has never been presented before. So trust me, this is gonna be a wild one. As always, we'll explore their story in the order the games were released. With over 20 years of shifting lore, The Sims has become a maze of contradictions and retcons. But by unpacking how and why the story evolved, we can finally start to make sense of it all. After each mainline game era, I'll pause to summarize how their narrative changes, building towards a definitive Caliente timeline. If you enjoy the video and want to see more deep dives like this, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below telling me your favorite moment. And don't forget, after you subscribe, click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's get started. We're first introduced to Nina and Dina Caliente in The Sims 2. The sisters live at 170 Main Street in Pleasantview, a slick 3-story condo that's every bit as bold and dramatic as they are. Nina and Dina are fraternal twins, and based on the order they age up in game, Nina appears to be the elder. By the time the game begins, their parents Flamenco and Nina Caliente have already passed away. Both Flamenco and Nina are Mediterranean in origin, as suggested by Nina's bio. Flamenco likely hails from the Sims equivalent of Spain, while Nina, whose maiden name is Al Mahmoud, is probably a Middle Eastern country along the Mediterranean coast. Despite having no jobs, both sisters are clearly drawn to money, fashion, and travel. While Nina dreams of finding a soulmate, Dina is singularly focused on wealth. Simply put, and the game doesn't hide it, Dina is a gold digger. According to their neighborhood story, the Caliente sisters arrived in Pleasantview on the eve of Bella Goth's disappearance, raising suspicions about whether their interest in Mortimer Goth is romantic or purely financial. At the start of the game, Dina's already in love with Mortimer, and she's also the widow of Michael Bachelor, Bella Goth's brother. The Caliente family album confirms that Dina and Michael married shortly before his death, despite a significant age gap. If that weren't unsettling enough, Dina's in-game memories show she had her first kiss with Michael while she was still a teen, meaning he was already an adult at the time. Yeah, let's move on. Nina, on the other hand, isn't married, but she's been in a relationship with her neighbor Don Lothario since they were teenagers. Don Lothario is basically the village bicycle of Pleasantview, juggling relationships with Nina, maid-for-hire Kaylin Langerak, and somehow being engaged to Katrina Goth. As mentioned, Don lives right next door to the Caliente sisters at 150 Main Street, in a messy bachelor condo that perfectly mirrors his chaotic love life. He's working as an intern in the medical field and seems to have arrived in Pleasantview around the same time as the Calientes. His neighborhood story hints that he may have also been involved in Bella Goth's disappearance, casting doubt on the sincerity of his engagement to Cassandra. If you've seen my video on the Goth family history, you'll know we already explored Bella's disappearance in detail, but to understand the Calientes' role in all of this, we need to revisit that story briefly. Dina, Nina, and Don all arrived in Pleasantview shortly after Michael Bachelor's death. Bella Goth was abducted by aliens on Don Lothario's rooftop shortly after she stopped by to welcome him to the neighborhood. In the aftermath, Dina set her sights on Mortimer Goth, while Don, still romantically involved with Nina, began dating and eventually got engaged to Katrina Goth. He did so reluctantly, often running from the altar when the wedding day arrives. Those are the in-game facts. But there's enough evidence to suggest that one or more of these three individuals may have played a direct role in Bella's disappearance. Motive, means, opportunity. Those are the three conditions a suspect must meet to be considered guilty of a crime. Don had nothing to gain from Bella's disappearance, so while he may have been involved, it's unlikely he orchestrated it. Mortimer Goth is the wealthiest Sim in Pleasantview. With Bella out of the picture, both Nina and Dina, who value wealth above all else, stood to gain significantly. But how could two seemingly ordinary young women possibly orchestrate an alien abduction? Well, there's something I didn't tell you earlier. You see, Nina and Dina, they're part alien. By exploring their family tree, we learn that their father Flamenco is the son of Nestor Caliente and Pollination Technician 7. Aliens in The Sims are extraterrestrials who regularly send pollination technicians to abduct and impregnate biological male Sims. Why they target male Sims or how those pregnancies work is left vague, and honestly that's probably for the best. But it does mean Nina and Dina are 1/4 alien. And that alien lineage suggests they may very well have the means to contact or even enlist the help of aliens to abduct Bella. But when it comes to opportunity, that's where things get interesting. Some might assume Nina persuaded Don to be complicit in Bella's disappearance, but when we examine the in-game memories, we discover that Dina and Don were also having an affair. If Nina finds out about this, she gets angry, implying she didn't know the full extent of their relationship. And while that's circumstantial, Don's engagement to Cassandra Goth feels like the smoking gun. Cassandra needed to be emotionally distracted by Don so that Dina could move in on Mortimer without interference. But Nina, who generally loves Don and longs for a soulmate, would never agree to share him. But Dina would. Dina Caliente had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. While Nina and Don may have been complicit, Dina was, without a shadow of a doubt, the driving force behind the crime. This theory is so compelling that many simmers have even speculated that Dina orchestrated Michael Bachelor's death as well. Michael is first introduced in The Sims, and in that game, he's actually younger than Mortimer Goth. So the idea that he dies of old age long before the events of The Sims 2 just doesn't add up. That's led to a popular theory that Dina convinced Michael to drink the elixir of life, an item that if used incorrectly can age a sim rather than extend their life. In other words, she may not have killed him directly, but she definitely accelerated his death. And while the elixir of life is often treated as a gameplay MacGuffin, it's explicitly mentioned in a 2005 official interview with the fictional Bella Goth. In that interview, Bella confirms that Mortimer created the elixir, and more importantly, that Dina, not Nina, was long suspected of playing a role in Bella's disappearance. So while Dina may not have murdered Michael Bachelor, the evidence strongly suggests she helped hasten his passing for her own benefit. We'll learn what became of the Calientes and Don in The Sims 3. But first, we need to talk about how The Sims 2 on consoles took the Caliente family in a very strange direction. Released in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube, The Sims 2 console was a slightly reworked version of the original PC game, adjusted to accommodate console controls and graphical limitations. But it didn't stop there. This version introduced a full-fledged story mode that expanded on the towns of Pleasantview, Strangetown, and a third, lesser-known location, Melbourne. No, not that Melbourne. Near the end of the game, we find Nina, Dina, and Don staying at the Jugan House in Melbourne, a rundown youth hostel operated by a character named Toothless Joe. Their household bio provides some surprising backstory. Apparently, Nina and Dina were once famous for modeling hand tools and were even featured in the 2004 hand tool calendar Wrenches of Summer. Wrenches of Summer. Dina is supposedly pursuing a career in law enforcement, but that seems unlikely as her career tab clearly lists her as unemployed. Nina's biography proudly declares she's the brains of the operation, but considering everything we know from the PC version of The Sims 2, that may just be ignorance or misplaced confidence. Don, for his part, is still in the medical field and still just as sleazy as ever. Taken together, this suggests that The Sims 2 on consoles takes place shortly before the events of the PC game. It seems Nina, Dina, and Don are passing through Melbourne on their way to Pleasantview, where we officially meet them in The Sims 2. Dina's claim of working in law enforcement may have been nothing more than a cover, to keep people from asking too many questions about who they were or what they're planning. And that, as far as canon goes, is everything The Sims 2 on consoles reveals about the Caliente family. Now let's put it all together and break down the complete Sims 2 timeline based on everything we've uncovered so far. Nestor and Dulcinea Caliente, as well as Benazir and Tariq Al-Mahmoud, are born somewhere in Sim Nation. Around the same time, Carmelo and Mama Lothario, along with Primo and Isabella Fiorello, are also born. Later on, Nestor and Dulcinea Caliente meet, get married, and have a son named Tango Caliente. Eventually, Nestor is abducted by Pollination Technician 7, becomes pregnant, and gives birth to Flamenco Caliente. Meanwhile, Carmelo and Mama Lothario meet, marry, and have a son named Nicolo Lothario. Around the same time, Primo and Isabella Fiorello meet, marry, and have a daughter named Adriana Fiorello. Sometime after, Benazir and Tariq Al-Mahmoud have a daughter named Nigat Al-Mahmoud. Years later, Flamenco Caliente and Nigat Al-Mahmoud meet, marry, and have twin daughters named Nina and Dina Caliente. Parallel to the Calientes, Nicolo Lothario and Adriana Fiorello meet, marry, and have a son named Don Lothario. During childhood, Nina and Dina tragically lose their mother, Nigat. As teenagers, Don and Nina share their first kiss. Also during her teenage years, Dina has her first kiss with the adult Michael Bachelor. As an adult, Don experiences the loss of both his parents, Adriana and Nicolo. Later on, Don and Nina fall in love. Around this time, Don begins his career in the medical field. Nina and Dina become models and gain popularity with the 2004 hand tool calendar Wrenches of Summer. Meanwhile, Flamenco Caliente passes away, leaving Nina and Dina orphaned. As a young adult, Dina gets engaged to and marries Michael Bachelor. During her marriage, Dina and Don begin an affair. Dina convinces Michael to take the elixir of life, causing him to rapidly age to an elder. Eventually, Michael Bachelor dies of old age, leaving his fortune to Dina. Not long after, Dina seemingly squanders his wealth, prompting her to concoct a plan to marry Mortimer Goth by getting rid of Bella Goth. Following this, Dina, Nina, and Don make their way to Pleasantview but stop in Melbourne at the Jugan house for a short time. Dina concocts a false story of her background in law enforcement, perhaps to muddy the waters of her true intentions, but the three eventually move to Pleasantview. Shortly after arriving, Don is welcomed to the neighborhood by Bella Goth, whom he tries to make out with and is rejected. Moments later, Don witnesses Bella being abducted by aliens on his rooftop. After the abduction, Don meets Cassandra Goth and, under Dina's influence, kisses her. Soon after, Don meets and kisses Kaylin Langerak. Over time, Don falls in love with Kaylin and woohoos with her multiple times. Eventually, Don gets engaged to Cassandra Goth. Despite this, he continues his affairs with both Kaylin and Nina. Meanwhile, Dina meets and falls in love with Mortimer Goth. Finally, on the eve of his wedding to Cassandra, Don panics and leaves her at the altar. With that, we move into the next chapter of the Calientes family history, where the story truly begins to unravel. While The Sims 3 didn't initially include the Caliente family, the downloadable world of Riverview, available to anyone who registered their copy of the game, did feature our familiar friend, Don Lothario. The trailer for Riverview's release actually shows Don arriving via teleportation onto the McDermott granary. He's still a young adult, and according to his household bio, he stepped onto a teleporter as women laughed in the background, only to wake up in Riverview. The bio confirms that this is the Don Lothario from The Sims 2. And the laughter we hear as Don vanishes, that's no accident. It strongly suggests that this disappearance was orchestrated by the Caliente sisters. Given everything we know from The Sims 2, it seems the sisters had one final loose end to tie up in their plot to secure Mortimer Goth's fortune, using advanced alien technology to send Don Lothario back in time. This isn't dimension hopping or alternate reality storytelling. We know it's time travel because Riverview features younger versions of familiar characters, Skip Broke and both Bob and Betty Newby, all clearly appearing years before their roles in The Sims 2 and 1. According to established lore, The Sims 3 Sunset Valley takes place roughly 25 years before The Sims 1 and 50 years before The Sims 2. However, as I've said time and again, not every world in The Sims 3 exists at the same point in the timeline. Since Skip is still a child in Riverview and dies as an adult before The Sims 2 begins, and Bob and Betty are full-grown adults in The Sims 1, we can reasonably conclude that Don was sent about 30 years into the past, just before The Sims 1, but long after the events of Sunset Valley. The fact that both Nina and Dina were involved in sending Don back suggests that Nina's supposed love for him may have been just an act. This adds weight to what The Sims 2 Console Edition and The Sims 3 have been hinting at all along. Nina is the brains of the operation. If that's true, then while it contradicts much of The Sims 2's presentation, The Sims 3 seems to retcon the story, implying that Nina may have orchestrated the entire Bella Goth plot from the very beginning. In 2009, The Sims released its first expansion pack, World Adventures, which introduced players to Alcimara. While there's no direct Caliente lore tied to Alcimara, it's clearly inspired by Egypt and marks the first Mediterranean-style world in Sim Nation. Given what we know, it's a reasonable assumption that Tariq and Benazir Al-Mahmoud, Nina and Dina's grandparents, were likely born in or near Alcimara. In 2010, The Sims 3 released Barnacle Bay, a coastal island nestled in the Sumayan Sea meant to serve as a tropical vacation retreat. The Sumayan Sea is likely the Sims equivalent of the Mediterranean Sea that borders Alcimara, and I say that because Nina and Dina Caliente are residents of Barnacle Bay. The sisters live at 25 Coral Flats with their friend Luisa Libros in a cozy seaside bungalow. Now, the placement of Barnacle Bay in the Sims timeline has long been debated. Some fans believe it takes place before The Sims 2, while others argue it happens after. But let's look at the facts. The Sims 2 clearly states that Nina and Don were romantically involved since their teen years, and that Nina, Dina, and Don all arrived in Pleasantview together. The complete absence of Don in Barnacle Bay challenges the idea that this is a prequel, and the household bio strongly suggests continuity, implying these are the same sisters from The Sims 2, continuing their story after the events of Pleasantview. As for their ages, Nina and Dina appeared as adults in The Sims 2 simply because the young adult life stage didn't exist yet. In truth, their personalities and appearances align more with young adults. With that in mind, it seems evident that Barnacle Bay takes place shortly after The Sims 2. By this point, the sisters have seemingly disposed of Don and failed to marry Mortimer Goth. With their plans unraveling, they retreat to the Mediterranean coast to quietly start over, away from the chaos they left behind. Dina has already resumed her usual behavior, romancing multiple Sims, but this time she's also picked up a job in the culinary career to make ends meet. Nina hasn't missed a beat either. She's romantically pursuing the same Sims as Dina while launching a career in athletics. Interestingly, her aspiration has also changed. The decision to remove Nina's original romance aspiration and replace it with super popular suggests that her love for Don may have never been real, or at the very least was exaggerated in later years. Unfortunately, this marked a rather underwhelming end for the Caliente sisters. The big reveal that Nina and Dina were behind elaborate schemes for power and fortune only to fail and retreat to a quiet island in the middle of nowhere feels undeniably anticlimactic. Still, their story isn't over just yet. But before we move on to The Sims 4, let's pause and update our timeline, now accounting for the events of The Sims 3. Nestor and Dulcinea Caliente are born somewhere in Sim Nation. Benazir and Tariq Al-Mahmoud are born in Alsamara. Around the same time, Carmelo and Mama Lothario, along with Primo and Isabella Fiorello, are also born. Later on, Nestor and Dulcinea Caliente meet, get married, and have a son named Tango Caliente. Eventually, Nestor is abducted by Pollination Technician 7, becomes pregnant, and gives birth to Flamenco Caliente. Meanwhile, Carmelo and Mama Lothario meet, marry, and have a son named Nicolo Lothario. Around the same time, Primo and Isabella Fiorello meet, marry, and have a daughter named Adriana Fiorello. Sometime after, Benazir and Tariq Al-Mahmoud have a daughter named Nigat Al-Mahmoud. Years later, Flamenco Caliente and Nigat Al-Mahmoud meet, marry, and have twin daughters named Nina and Dina Caliente. Parallel to the Calientes, Nicolo Lothario and Adriana Fiorello meet, marry, and have a son named Don Lothario. During childhood, Nina and Dina tragically lose their mother, Nigat. As teenagers, Don and Nina share their first kiss. Also during her teenage years, Dina has her first kiss with the adult Michael Bachelor. As an adult, Don experiences the loss of both his parents, Adriana and Nicolo. Later on, Don and Nina fall in love. Around this time, Don begins his career in the medical field. Nina and Dina become models and gain popularity with the 2004 hand tool calendar, Wrenches of Summer. Meanwhile, Flamenco Caliente passes away, leaving Nina and Dina orphaned. As a young adult, Dina gets engaged to and marries Michael Bachelor. During her marriage, Dina and Don begin an affair. Dina convinces Michael to take the elixir of life, causing him to rapidly age to an elder. Eventually, Michael Bachelor dies of old age, leaving his fortune to Dina. Not long after, Dina seemingly squanders his wealth, prompting Nina to concoct a plan to marry Dina to Mortimer. Following this, Dina, Nina, and Don make their way to Pleasantview, but stop in Melbourne at the Jugan House for a short time. Dina concocts a false story of her background in law enforcement, perhaps to muddy the waters of her true intentions, but the three eventually move to Pleasantview. Shortly after arriving, Don is welcomed to the neighborhood by Bella Goth, whom he tries to make out with and is rejected. Moments later, Don witnesses Bella being abducted by aliens on his rooftop. After the abduction of Bella, Don meets Cassandra Goth and, under Nina's influence, kisses her. Soon after, Don meets and kisses Kaylin Langerak. Over time, Don falls in love with Kaylin and woohoos with her multiple times. Eventually, Don gets engaged to Cassandra Goth. Despite this, he continues his affairs with both Kaylin and Nina. Meanwhile, Dina meets and falls in love with Mortimer Goth. Finally, on the eve of his wedding to Cassandra, Don panics and leaves her at the altar. Nina and Dina, tying all remaining loose ends, teleport Don Lothario to Riverview. Dina fails to seal the deal with Mortimer Goth, and the two flee to Barnacle Bay. Nina gets a job in the sports career, and Dina becomes a line cook. The sisters continue their string of romances and mind games, far away from the lives they ruined. And with that, we enter the final chapter in the saga of the Caliente sisters and Don Lothario, where things are about to get confusing. With the release of The Sims 4 in 2014, Nina, Dina, and Don Lothario made their return, this time living together in sultry Springtide, a 3-bedroom home in Skyward Palms, a sunny subdivision of Oasis Springs. However, everything we thought we knew about their family history is thrown into chaos with the introduction of Katrina Caliente. According to the game, Katrina is Nina and Dina's mother, who recently invited her boy toy Don Lothario to move in. Now you might be thinking, wait a second Gons, didn't you say earlier that Nigat Caliente was their mother? And you'd be absolutely right, I did. Katrina Caliente has long stood as the strongest piece of evidence in favor of The Sims 4 being set in an alternate reality. Almost every other inconsistency in the game's lore can be explained, except for her. But here's the thing, and I can't believe I never noticed this before, The Sims 4 actually officially undermines the idea that it's part of an alternate universe. In last year's Behind the Sims episode, fan favorite and all-around lovely human Mercy hosted a lore segment called S'more Lore that focused on the Caliente family. In it, she directly confirmed that Katrina cannot possibly be Nina and Dina's biological mother because that role had already belonged to Nigat.
who the is Katrina Caliente? Because if there's one thing we can guess about this bodied redhead, it is that she may not be the twins' birth mother. That should go to the late Nina Caliente, who was already in the grave when the girls were first introduced back in The Sims 2.
She even floated a theory that Katrina might be a clone created by the Caliente sisters themselves to act as a mother figure. Whether or not that's true, Marcy states point blank, Katrina is not who she says she is, and teases that we might learn her real identity in the future. Now, if you think I'm reaching, ask yourself this. How could Katrina possibly be their mother based on their in-game ages? Katrina has just aged into an adult. Nina and Dina, they've just become young adults. According to the game clock, Katrina has been alive for 76 days and Nina and Dina for 48. So unless Katrina gave birth to twins the moment she became a teenager, the math simply doesn't work. I get that real life can be messy, but this is The Sims. This is impossible. But I want to challenge Marcy's theory and suggest something even more shocking. Katrina isn't the clone, Nina is. Remember earlier when I mentioned that Dina may have used the elixir of life to hasten Michael Bachelor's death? Well, Sims lore fans have long speculated that Nina and Dina used the elixir themselves to stay young. But what if Nina, the confirmed mastermind of the duo, is playing 4D chess? What if she stopped taking the elixir or found another way to age forward and eventually took on a new identity as Katrina? And what if, to avoid suspicion or to set up a fall woman, she created a clone of her younger self? I know this sounds wild, but ask yourself, why did The Sims 4 make Katrina fall in love with Don Lothario and not Nina? Why is Dina close friends with Don while Nina's only an acquaintance, even though Nina was Don's main love interest in The Sims 2? Why does The Sims 4 Nina have the villainous Valentine aspiration while Katrina's aspiration is soulmate, the same aspiration Nina had in The Sims 2? Still not convinced? Look at them side by side. Red hair, green eyes, brown eyebrows, dark olive complexion, nearly identical facial structure. These two aren't just similar, they're the same person. Katrina is not a new character, not a mother, not a placeholder. Katrina is Nina. She's Nina Caliente from The Sims 2 and The Sims 3, reborn, rebranded, and still playing the long game. This version of Nina is the clone. She has no job, she's labeled a dastardly villain, and exists only to absorb suspicion. The perfect fall woman. As for timeline placement, I believe Oasis Springs occurs just before Barnacle Bay. I've said this in every video in this series, but I'll say it again. The Sims 4 is not an alternate reality. Fans have long considered this canon due to one singular tweet made by a former producer for The Sims 4, but it simply isn't true. Like The Sims 3, each world exists at a different point in the timeline. And to me, it makes perfect sense that Nina, Dina, and Don relocated to Oasis Springs to avoid suspicion. And Nina, perhaps out of necessity, stopped taking the elixir of life, allowing herself to age naturally. In doing so, she shed her identity and re-emerged as Katrina Caliente. With the clone Nina set up to take the fall, the sisters made their final moves. They teleported Don to the past and fled to Barnacle Bay, where Nina quietly resumed the use of the elixir of life. Listen, when it comes to facts, all we can do is piece together theories. But one thing is absolutely certain, Katrina is not Nina and Dina's biological mother. And while the full truth of the Caliente legacy may not be written yet, until it is, I'm putting my money on this theory. With all that in mind, let's bring everything together. Here's what we've learned from The Sims 4 and how it fits into the definitive Caliente family timeline. Nestor and Dulcinea Caliente are born somewhere in Sim Nation. Benazir and Tariq Al-Mahmoud are born in Alsamara. Around the same time, Carmelo and Mama Lothario, along with Primo and Isabella Fiorello, are also born. Later on, Nestor and Dulcinea Caliente meet, get married, and have a son named Tango Caliente. Eventually, Nestor is abducted by Pollination Technician 7, becomes pregnant, and gives birth to Flamenco Caliente. Meanwhile, Carmelo and Mama Lothario meet, marry, and have a son named Nicolo Lothario. Around the same time, Primo and Isabella Fiorello meet, marry, and have a daughter named Adriana Fiorello. Sometime after, Benazir and Tariq Al-Mahmoud have a daughter named Nigat Al-Mahmoud. Years later, Flamenco Caliente and Nigat Al-Mahmoud meet, marry, and have twin daughters named Nina and Dina Caliente. Parallel to the Calientes, Nicolo Lothario and Adriana Fiorello meet, marry, and have a son named Don Lothario. During childhood, Nina and Dina tragically lose their mother, Nigat. As teenagers, Don and Nina share their first kiss. Also during her teenage years, Dina has her first kiss with the adult Michael Bachelor. As an adult, Don experiences the loss of both his parents, Adriana and Nicolo. Later on, Don and Nina fall in love. Around this time, Don begins his career in the medical field. Nina and Dina become models and gain popularity with the 2004 hand tool calendar, Wrenches of Summer. Meanwhile, Flamenco Caliente passes away, leaving Nina and Dina orphaned. As a young adult, Dina gets engaged to and marries Michael Bachelor. During her marriage, Dina and Don begin an affair. Dina convinces Michael to take the elixir of life, causing him to rapidly age to an elder. Eventually, Michael Bachelor dies of old age, leaving his fortune to Dina. Not long after, Dina seemingly squanders his wealth, prompting Nina to concoct a plan to marry Dina to Mortimer. Following this, Dina, Nina, and Don make their way to Pleasantview, but stop in Melbourne at the Jugan House for a short time. Dina concocts a false story of her background in law enforcement, perhaps to muddy the waters of her true intentions, but the three eventually move to Pleasantview. Shortly after arriving, Don is welcomed to the neighborhood by Bella Goth, whom he tries to make out with and is rejected. Moments later, Don witnesses Bella being abducted by aliens on his rooftop. After the abduction of Bella, Don meets Cassandra Goth and, under Nina's influence, kisses her. Soon after, Don meets and kisses Kaylin Langerak. Over time, Don falls in love with Kaylin and woohoos with her multiple times. Eventually, Don gets engaged to Cassandra Goth. Despite this, he continues his affairs with both Kaylin and Nina. Meanwhile, Dina meets and falls in love with Mortimer Goth. Finally, on the eve of his wedding to Cassandra, Don panics and leaves her at the altar. Dina fails to seal the deal with Mortimer Goth, and Nina, Dina, and Don run away to Oasis Springs. Nina stops taking the elixir of life and ages up, taking on the name Katrina. Katrina creates a clone of herself and calls her Nina. Katrina and Dina, tying all remaining loose ends, teleport Don Lothario to Riverview and abandon Nina to take any remaining blame. At some point, Katrina takes the elixir of life to reverse her aging, reclaiming the name Nina once more before moving to Barnacle Bay with Dina to start over. Nina gets a job in the sports career and Dina becomes a line cook. The sisters continue their string of romances and mind games far away from the lives they ruined. And with that, the tumultuous story of the Calientes comes to a close. For now. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for taking this journey with me. As always, I hope this deep dive helped you better understand how the lore of the Caliente family has evolved and how there's still secrets to uncover about the Sims' spiciest sisters. If you disagree with any of my theories, or if you've got your own, drop them in the comments below. And while you're there, let me know which Sim or Sim family you want me to do next. Producing these videos, keeping up with weekly shorts, and working a full-time job is a lot. So if you'd like to support me and help keep the content going, please consider joining my Patreon. The link's in the description, and a huge thank you to my current patrons. Your support means the world to me. And hey, if you want to hang out live, watch me play The Sims and other cozy games, come follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/mynameisgons. I stream Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 8 PM Eastern, and I'd love to see you there. Alright, until next time, stay curious, stay cozy, and see you in the next video.